Hello, welcome to the Service Management Show from the team here at Ethicode. I'm Gary Bower and I'm one of the ITSM practice leads here. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about the service management status reporting and the importance of visualization. And this month, I'm joined by a special guest who I'll let introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan Toombs. I am a solution architect here at Appfire.
Right, so first of all, service management status reporting, kind of what is it really? So anyone who's involved in service management will know that one of the things you're always asked to do is to produce reports and dashboards. What sort of reports and stuff have you kind of seen, Dan?
Anything really. I mean, a lot of what I was doing when I worked in a retail business was just a big service dashboard of all the microservices that they had. So they were a food retailer. So any kind of deliveries and when they were going in and out of the warehouses, they had to know if certain conveyor belts were going down, if trucks were not going out of the bays, and it was like the complete management of that. So it was really interesting, but it was a lot of green and red lights at any one time.
Yes, indeed. Yes, and you're quite right. It can vary, can't it? So I've seen, like you, I've seen various things. I've seen some businesses that have war rooms, and they'll just have lots of screens with loads of charts and flashing green and red lights and things like that. And then I've seen other teams that just basically do the basics, really. I mean, typical status reports that you'll need that in service management teams are interested in are things like ticket volume, current ticket status, service outages. But it can include other things as well, and we'll probably get touch on some of those a bit later. But it can include things like financial data. That's something which I know if you're running teams that are running a service desk where they're providing a service that's paid for, they need to track costs and revenue. We'll talk a little bit later, I think, probably about risks. Certainly risk management and visualizing risks is quite a tricky thing. And one of my favorite areas, which is experience management. So things like XLAs, CSATs, MPS, that sort of thing. So I thought the best thing to do is really just talk about some of our experiences. You mentioned one there. Talk about some of the challenges we've faced and how we overcome them. So have you got a good example that you can draw on?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big challenges I had, it was at the same one, but I've got a few for sure I've seen over the years. But one of the big challenges we had was it's great bringing in this data and doing some centralizing. Now that's challenge number one, is actually how do we get the data? Where do we need to get the right data from? And who needs to see it? But then how do you interpret that data to be able to actually be efficient and productive from it? Like if you're seeing that your ticket volumes for incidents have gone up 10 times, obviously there's an issue, but what does that actually mean? So, is it because one of your services is just shot to pieces? Is it because that actually you're not dealing with incidents as quick as you thought? What is the root cause of that analysis? And I know obviously that kind of feeds into problem management of what might be, but that's a big challenge that I've definitely seen.
I think probably the first one I would bring up is the $1 million question, which I'm often asked by a lot of customers: is what should we report on?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the answer normally is whatever's important to your business. So if depending on what you're trying to deliver as a service team, you really want to understand how effective or efficient you are being delivering that service, then that's what you measure and that's what you report on. But I often find that quite funny. It's like, what does everyone else report on? It's like, well,
it's not the same. Yeah. Just because people report on changes doesn't mean that change is important to your piece. Some other team might look after that, so it's irrelevant.
Yeah, indeed. And again, sort of addressing those, you talked about the retailer. That was obviously a very complicated one. But what sort of techniques have you used in terms of like producing reports?
I mean, I personally have only kind of worked where the teams are working because it's where it's as close as possible to the data. I know you can get a lot of very good connectors nowadays, and it limits, but because it's live data effectively, you can try and be as proactive as possible rather than waiting a day to get your next day's report, whatever it might be. So I always try and work where the people are. Now, for me, that has been a lot of time within Atlassian. So I trying to get things out of JSM if they're native, so Jira Service Management, or actually just creating a decent Jira dashboard and collecting information from everywhere we can. The first thing, obviously, as you said, just like, what do you want to report on? But we'll look at trying to create numbers, because they're more important. Not trying to create big filter lists. So trying to say, what's your creative versus resolved over time? What's the numbers? Is it going up? Is it going down? Have you got better CSAT scores than you had last time, for example? So it gives you a really good holistic picture. And then if there is a problem, you can drill from there.
I think it's a really good point. The trend is often more informative than the number itself. I think it's a very, very good point. Something which I was chatting to customer a week or two ago, and we were talking about sort of mean time to resolve and mean time to acknowledge and things like that.
Yeah, MTTR.
And they were talking about wanting to measure that against individuals, and I'm like, it doesn't really tell you much, because you don't really know what was going on in each of those events. I said, what's more important to understand is collectively your operations team, where's it trending up or down, and more importantly, are you getting spikes? So when you're looking at the data, you want to be able to visualize it in a way where you can see where there's a blip, and then maybe when there was a blip, try to find out why there was a blip. And probably it was a blip because lots of things were going wrong. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a massive fan, and this also goes because I've worked for both ITSM and more agile teams. I don't like the idea of individual based reporting. Not a fan of it. And I know a lot of companies try and do it, but there's a level of gamification, and then there's full on targeting, because the tickets that I might deal with, I might get a lot more, but they're really, really easy. Whereas you get the really complicated ones, and therefore you're more likely to miss your SLAs or your XLAs or whatever you haven't set in place. And it makes me look amazing. Not so much for you, but you're actually the one dealing the more important work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get lots of false positives if you drill down that deep. So certainly if you're looking to look at the trend, you need to look in the round rather than at the individual level. It's the same with if you're monitoring, if you've got monitoring tools that you're receiving event data from, and again, you want to be able to see when you're getting those spikes. Maybe if you're a retailer, for example, you'll probably find you're getting those spikes at weekends or in evenings, when an online retailer, because that's when most people do their online shopping. So you want to see that in the round. You don't necessarily want to kind of drill down into individual monitoring tools and different things to try to see what it is. So in terms of presenting the data, you mentioned, so we mainly talk about Jira, you mentioned Jira dashboards. Are there any other kind of methods that you've used to present that kind of status reporting data?
Any other methods outside of Jira dashboards?
I found that a lot of teams like to see things in spreadsheets. and sometimes some data you can visualize quite nicely in a spreadsheet. I'm not talking about, status reporting as in probably monthly, you generate a monthly status report. And sometimes you want that kind of pivot table of information, which shows kind of, these are the types of tickets we had, and this was the average, mean time to closure, that sort of thing.
I fully understand that marketplace apps, obviously being Appfire, there's a slight. We do, yeah. We've got a few, and that's obviously the slight plug. But I understand why people will want to take some of that data out. They might, like you say, they could be pivot tables. It could be that they need to put that data in a data lake for future reporting. Exactly, right? So there's a lot of other things, and full native Jira functionality is okay. It's not perfect, but it's okay, which means that you have to go to marketplace apps if you want to keep it within Jira. So a lot of companies may look and say, actually, well, because we already have these tools, we're just going to take it out and do it there. I prefer, personally, again, as I said, to try and keep that data within it. So, we've got a JXL, which is a spreadsheet-like app that can give you all of those MTTRs and everything within Jira. We've got Dashboard Hub, which obviously allows people to build these much more comprehensive dashboards within Jira. I mean, it is good being able to drill down that far. I personally see much more benefit in just saying, okay, the trend over time, if you're seeing that your numbers are going up, then you can go from there. But you want your dashboards to be like the first thing you check, but not spend 2 hours on every single day, because you want to get onto the work.
Yeah, it's the visualization layer. It's the thing that gives you that kind of key indication, or the helicopter view, as some people sometimes call it. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I thought we'd talk a little bit about sort of visualization and status reporting best practices. So the sort of things that you need to think about when looking to do any kind of status reporting. So I'll start off with my first recommendation or suggestion, which is, who is the audience? Because often a lot of the bad examples of this I see is people collect all these wonderful statistics and they produce these beautiful dashboards, and then nobody actually looks at them because it's not in their interest.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
Well, it's also the same for project updates. When you think PMs spend ages, no one reads them.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, who's your audience? And I think you mentioned a good one there actually, which is something that as service management teams we often get. Sometimes your audience is actually the customer. So you're having to present that information to the customer. So again, if it's the customer you're presenting some kind of status report or visualization to, you've got to think very carefully how you present that information to them.
I think with customers, it's really good to kind of be as transparent as you can. I think that if you can maybe not necessarily give names about particular agents that looked after your work, but being able to say, on average, 8 out of 10 tickets were perfectly within SLA, and these are that. I think you have a much better relationship when you can present that type of information to them. But yes, obviously you do need to be slightly more careful about not showing all of the hope.
Any sort of tips from yourself?
I think the first thing you need to do is make it as easy as possible. I, again, try and be proactive about trying to show this information. So if you have a portal-like functionality for your customers, give that information to them there, right? As they're raising tickets, let them see that data. Obviously, be upfront, and maybe as part of your contracts, you have to send an email with a nice produce report every month or whatever it might be, but give them that information to digest it when they're ready. So, if you can, like I said, if you have this portal, try and find something that says, here's a list of the 10 tickets that you created. Here's who created them. Here's the topic and the area that you're having an issues with. And did we resolve them within time?
Now, another sort of common phrase you'll hear is garbage in, garbage out. So my next tip really is making sure that the data that you're using, the underlying data you're using is accurate.
Yeah. Triage.
Yeah, it's important to understand where the data's coming from, and if you're requiring your team or some kind of automation or algorithm to manipulate that data, then obviously you need to make sure that it's reliable.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, I would say bad data is worse than no data. So
yeah, it can give certainly the wrong interpretation of your ability.
Indeed. Any others from yourself?
Well, I was just about to say, this is somewhat on effective triage, right? So being able to spot signs of, is it just a badly created ticket? Is there things that we can change on, like just custom field data? How would you solve some of that first interaction with a bad ticket?
That's a good question. I think you have to understand why you're getting that bad data, I guess. I mean, to be honest with you, most of the time you're getting bad data, it's normally because there's some kind of manual step involved. And
humans.
Yeah, whenever there's a manual step, you're likely to get inconsistency. So if you've got a team of 10 people, you might find that a third of your team fill things in beautifully, and they recording time is a good example. You'd know this from working with project teams. Recording time is a classic example of this. You take a sample set of 10 people, a third of people will record time really accurately and diligently. Another third of people will kind of go, yeah, that'll do. And then the other third will forget. And in many ways, that's worse. As I said, bad data is worse than no data. So yeah, I think that's normally the starting place for me, is to understand where is the inconsistency occurring, or where is the bad data occurring. And normally, it's not always the case, but normally it's because it's a manual step. And where possible, I think with any kind of status reporting, you want it to be, what's the word I'm looking for? You want it to be inherent. You want it to just, the data to be generated as you do stuff, rather than things that you have to manually track. But for some things you do, like only a person can really say how much effort they spend on something. How about yourself?
I mean, I think a lot of it starts with about knowledge. So, you know, if you are my customer, you raise a ticket, as an agent, I need to be able to physically understand or be able to interpret. And the only way I can do that is have as much knowledge on my services as I can. Because at that moment, I could say, oh, this is raised under the wrong request type, or it needs to be escalated to this team, not that team. And all of that information is what would eventually go into a status report. You know, who's been hit the hardest with escalations this month? You know, what's gone wrong? And if I don't know as my first line of defense, that level of knowledge, the report is immediately wrong.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, and the other question I was going to ask really is, you mentioned it actually briefly then when you talked about real-time data and dashboards, and you also mentioned about like doing like a monthly report or something like that. What would you consider the kind of best use case for those? So when is it a good idea to use a dashboard, and when is it a good idea to like generate like a report?
I think you actually had it, which is about your target audience.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
because your service managers or your agents or your direct customers are going to be the ones that maybe care about having a dashboard right there and then. And I know I'm generalizing slightly, but they're going to be those. Whereas in your executives, the people that are signing and agreeing the contract are going to care about that status report of like, actually, are we going to get our money's worth? And that's going to come from that monthly report style.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah, generally the kind of executive summary or anything contractual. I also think some data, we were talking about earlier really, we're talking about measuring individual. Some data you need to look in the round, and so you need to look at the longer term anyway. I mean, a good example of that are like XLAs. When you're looking at XLAs, you tend to look on like a quarterly, annual or biannual basis. You know, you're not looking at it like weekly or whatever. So you can have a dashboard, but that dashboard is going to tell you the last quarter rather than like, you know, real-time information.
Yeah, I guess there's maybe it's the period of time. So if you want proactive, you want day-to-day runnings, whereas the longer you get, you're moving more to that summary.
You're right. In a war room, you want to know what's working and what isn't, and what major incidents you've got, things like that. And, you know, that's the kind of real-time thing. Right, okay. So we've sort of finished off now. Obviously, invited Dan on, who's from Appfire, who have got a lot of these apps. I should say on the Atlassian marketplace, reporting is probably the most popular third-party app.
Yep.
And also outside of just Atlassian, you know, you've got powerful dashboarding tools like Tableau and Power BI and all these other things. And the good thing is that all these things work with most service management tools anyway, including JSM. But you guys have got some interesting ones. You mentioned one. The other one I wanted to sort of mention was your risk management one, which Ethico
Hedge.
we're a big fan of. Do you want to just give a bit of background to that and why that kind of visualization is useful?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hedge is a risk management app. So it's fairly, one thing I will say is it's cloud only, just for those that are still on DC. But the risk management app for us is effectively the ability to take in all that data no matter what it is. So if you literally have risk as an issue type, for example, or you have mitigations, whatever it might be, it's been able to, rather than just have a bunch of custom fields which says, you know, maybe this is your inherent risk, this is your residual risk, we can now visualize it with color. Now, as humans, we are far more visual than we are, I always forget what it is. Not audible, whatever it is, readable.
Yeah, we prefer to look. A picture tells 1,000 words and all that. Yeah,
it does, right? So by being able to say, okay, well, this is a dark red risk, therefore that kind of means that it's going to be much higher inherent risk, much more likelihood of having maybe it's much higher impact, and therefore that's going to be the one that your businesses are going to want to focus on, rather than maybe like your light blues, maybe your trivial ones. So Hedge is very customizable. So you create your matrix, you design the scoring system to fit your business, and then it just does that visualization aspect.
And it does the classic risk matrix thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those, if you're not aware, in the industry, there are some very expensive risk management products out there. And basically, that's all they do. They just produce that kind of classic risk matrix view. I think when it comes, we're talking about visualization, I think you're right. Visualize, because actually one of the things humans are very bad at is actually understanding risk, which is why the betting industry is so successful. People don't really understand the concept. Humans are bad at sort of estimating risk. And so one of the ways of demystifying that by using clever, reporting and visualization techniques is to, as you said, move away from just having numbers and actually have it as a visualization and use like color coding or shading to indicate the level of risk involved, either impact or how much residual risk there is. So FCO, we're big fans of that app, because there isn't really anything else quite like that on the Atlassian marketplace, and those types of things are really expensive outside of it.
But I think the other aspect is it's next to your data, it's living with your data, and I truly do appreciate the fact that teams do not solely work in one tool. I'm very well aware of that. That's why connectors exist and integrations, and a lot of teams spend their time on that. But there is value in having that type of reporting next to where you're storing the physical data.
Absolutely. Yeah. And full disclosure, we use Hedge with our customers when we do governance, risk and compliance projects. So again, one of the reasons we invite Dan on to talk about it already. Right. So Dan, I've given a little plug for one of your apps, but do you want to give a general sort of plug to Appfire and what you guys do and where they can reach out to you?
Absolutely. So we are, I would say, probably the largest, or certainly one of the largest marketplace vendors in the Atlassian ecosystem. We have over 170 apps, skipping from reporting, as we've just spoken about, to customer experience for JSM. Maybe then you're looking at connectors and integrations all the way through to agile and strategic portfolio management. So whatever your kind of challenge is, whether you're currently working on within your team, there is probably an app for that. Now, we do always recommend that if there's something native that can do it, you may want to look to that, but a lot of our apps are enhancements on native functionality. So if you're finding that there's still a bit of a problem and you want to get something better, just come speak to us, or have a look on the Atlassian marketplace. Obviously just reach out as well. There's plenty of Appfires, Fireflies as we're known, that would certainly put you at the right app.
And what's the best place to reach out to you, Dan? On LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, yeah, absolutely. You can do that. I'm on the Atlassian community as well. So if there's a particular app that you're interested in, you can post something in the community, and all of our Fireflies look at that as well.
You've just reminded me, actually, at some point I need to bring you back on to talk about running a Atlassian community, because I know you run the Solent Ace, don't you?
Yeah. Again, I love my community, so.
Yeah, I need to. Yeah, my colleague Magnus runs the Stockholm one, so that's definitely a future show in the planning there.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Dan. Right. So we'll wrap things up there. Obviously, if you've got any comments that you'd like to leave on this topic or anything else that we've covered on the Service Management Show, then do leave comments either on the YouTube video or on the LinkedIn post. We do read all your comments and take them on board and like to have a sort of discussion with you. Do share the podcast with your friends and the usual like and subscribe on the video. Thanks, Dan, for joining me on the show this month.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And we'll be back next month with another Service Management Show, so do hope you join us then.